Hello, my name is Lisa Wolf. Welcome to our Vaping Epidemic presentation. Before I start, a little bit about the Center for Humanistic Change. We have been active in the Valley for over 40 years, providing prevention education to our community, primarily Lehigh and Northampton counties. We are funded by the Lehigh and Northampton County Drug and Alcohol Divisions, as well as some generous grant providers. And we go into nearly every school in those two counties, many churches, community centers, anywhere people gather who want to learn about how to avoid drug and alcohol use, how to build coping skills, resiliency, how to manage their stress. So if you're interested in learning more about us, I do provide that information at the end of this video. But today we're going to talk about vaping. This is definitely a huge issue in our society today, with a lot of teens who are vaping and not understanding just how bad it can be. So here we go. So anytime I talk about any kind of drug use, I'm always going to talk about the brain, especially the adolescent brain. The brain in adolescence is going through so much development and maturation that using any kind of drug during this time of life can be very dangerous and have long-lasting consequences. So the brain develops from the back to the front. When someone is born, the brain and the back is pretty much well developed. That would be physical coordination and vision, things like that. The brain, as the person gets older, the middle of the brain is pretty much developed at about the age of 14, 15. That includes cognition, emotion, motivation. And last to develop is the front of the brain, the prefrontal cortex. The brain is not fully developed until about the age of 25. And yet the average age of first drug use is about 13 or 14 years old. So it is the most popular time for people to try drugs, and it is absolutely the worst time that they should be getting involved with drugs. You can have lifelong consequences from using drugs at such a young age. So let's take a look at a metaphor for the adolescent brain. So the LA freeway system, lots of different roadways coming in, different levels, lots of traffic connecting people all over a city. Now imagine a boulder rolled down the mountainside into the middle of that freeway system. What would it do? It would damage parts of it. It would stop traffic from flowing. There are different levels, so it would, crash down upon itself, and it would make a real mess. Some parts of it might not ever be repaired. So even if they did rebuild it, it would take a very long time, and it might never be the same as it was. Now imagine that that's the adolescent brain. All those different pathways and neurons with connections being made. Some of those pathways won't be needed, they're paired away. Information is being integrated. There is social and emotional growth. And now, instead of a boulder, we're talking about taking drugs. Drugs are going to disrupt some of that growth in there. It's going to disrupt the signals that, and the pathways that are being connected. And it can have long-lasting consequences. And if that person does stop using drugs, the brain will repair itself, but it might not ever be the way it was supposed to be. It might not ever really heal. People can really have long-lasting consequences. Now, the part of the brain that is responsible for a lot of people staying addicted is the middle of the brain, the pleasure center of the brain, right? So when someone uses a drug, that part releases dopamine and your brain goes, I love how that feels, do that again, right? And that's what keeps people coming back for that feeling. And the prefrontal cortex that I talked about, that's kind of like what puts the brakes on. But again, that's not fully developed in adolescence. So kids who start using drugs in their teen years, they're not really thinking about the long-term consequences. They're not really thinking about what could happen down the road. And because that part of their brain that would kind of help to do that isn't mature enough. So the pleasure center of the brain is kind of like a toddler without any supervision. right? Know when to say, stop, that's not good for you, not a good idea. And that's where a lot of young people can get themselves into trouble. Just by delaying use, let's say, instead of drinking at 15, wait until you're 21 when it's legal. Or instead of trying marijuana as a teenager, waiting until you're 25 or 26, when the brain is fully mature, the chances of addiction, chances of damage plummet as you get older. So at least by delaying use makes a big, big difference. Now imagine the adult brain. So this is a different kind of freeway system. It runs much more smoothly. You don't have all those connections being made. It's very efficient. So if a boulder fell into the middle of this freeway system, it wouldn't do the damage that that other boulder did to the adolescent brain or that LA freeway system. So I'm not going to advocate that drugs are good, even for adults, because they can still have some dire consequences. But the chances of damage, and especially long-term damage, do go down the older you get. So now I'm going to get into nicotine and vaping devices. And before I go further, I am going to talk about the new changes in the law, because I'm betting a lot of people would be curious about that right up front. So as of February 6th, 2020, you can no longer buy disposable pods in flavors. So that would be like the disposable Juul pod, the Enjoy or Swarin. You can only get those disposable pods in tobacco and menthol flavors. However, the change in that law left a huge loophole. You can still get e-juices in a bottle, and disposable products might call it a one-hitter. It might look like more like a cigarette, and once it's done, you don't recharge it. You just throw the whole thing into the garbage. Those are still available in many flavors. They are available in local stores and online. Another change in the law was that federal law changed in December that tobacco products cannot be sold to anyone under the age of 21. And it will become Pennsylvania state law on July 1st. And I think that's when we'll see it begin to be really more well enforced. Pennsylvania state law says that no one can buy tobacco products under the age of 21 except for active or discharged military personnel. They can still buy it at the age of 18. One of the other big changes of that law is that either an adult or a student who is found with any kind of tobacco product, including vaping products, on public school grounds can receive a summary offense. So that would be like a ticket or a fine, might involve community service. So there will be some legal consequences on the public school grounds. So what is nicotine? So first of all, nicotine is a drug. It's actually very poisonous. If you drank nicotine out of one of those little bottles for vape juices, it could actually kill you. If you had spilled pure nicotine on your skin, it could burn your skin. So it's a drug that's found in tobacco products and is extremely addictive. They compare giving up nicotine to giving up heroin, as far as it is so difficult for people to stop. If you have ever lived with someone who has tried to stop smoking, you know, or you try to do that yourself, you know exactly what I'm talking about. It is extremely hard. So nicotine, like other drugs, causes the release of dopamine in the pleasure center of the brain. And when that dopamine is released, it makes us feel good. Nicotine might make you feel relaxed if you're anxious. You might hear people say, oh my gosh, I need a cigarette in times of stress. So we get pleasure from it. We don't get high, but we do get a sense of pleasure from that nicotine. So nicotine is a stimulant. So it causes the release of glucose, and that, you know, we have an increase in heart rate and breathing and blood pressure. It also makes us feel more alert. So if, for example, if you're a student and you're sitting in a class at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, you're getting sleepy. Some people might go for a soda or a cup of coffee or some chocolate. But somebody who vapes, they head to the restroom, get a couple hits off their Juul, it's going to make them feel more awake and more focused. And a little bit of a feeling of euphoria. Again, not high, but a little bit of euphoric. So there is something that people get out of that is a physical reaction that keeps them coming back for more. So here's how nicotine works in the brain. Person, inhales the nicotine through the mouth, and the nicotine travels up into that pleasure center of the brain, which in turn releases the dopamine. And your brain says, that felt good, do that again. And it only lasts for about 10 seconds. So we become conditioned to keep repeating that behavior in order to get that feeling. Another issue when we deal with any kind of addiction is an increase in tolerance over time. So let's say I start smoking cigarettes. And for a while, I have one cigarette every 2 or 3 hours, and that's all I need. That gives me that alertness I want. I feel very satisfied with that. But eventually, you need more and more to get the same effect. So let's say now I start smoking 3 cigarettes every few hours, and I'm maintaining that pleasure. And this is how people increase the use of nicotine, alcohol, marijuana, in that you need more to get that same feeling. So let's say I want to stop. If I quit very quickly, I'm going to go into withdrawal. If I quit what they call cold turkey, and it can be miserable. People might have emotional side effects like feeling more stressed, depressed, lethargic, quick to anger. They might have physical effects such as feeling nauseous or sweaty, insomnia, headaches. Nicotine really does change the body chemistry, the brain chemistry, that makes it extremely difficult to give up. So the body on nicotine, a quick review of what we were talking about. So like any kind of drug, nicotine rewires and changes the brain and how it functions. And any kind of drug can actually leave effects that can be lifelong. Because it's a stimulant, your heart beats faster and it raises your blood pressure. Obviously, if you're inhaling something like smoke or vapor from a vape device, you can damage the lungs and have trouble breathing. And lastly, it can cause some issues with the digestion system. So I'm going to give you a few seconds to see how many of these you know. I would be looking for the actual brand name. I do this with students and adults. And I will tell you right now that when I do it with middle or high school kids, they are going to know a minimum of 3 or 4, but there are a lot of kids that can name every single one of those devices. When I do it with adults, they usually can name 1. And I'm guessing you might know what that one is. So there you go, those are the names. So I'm betting most adults know number 7, the Juul. A lot of kids will know the Swarm, the Blue, the Enjoy. And like I said, a lot of kids can know all of them. And it might not be that they're using them, but these devices have been advertised to them over the last few years. They are in their social media, in their Twitter feed or their Facebook page or their Instagram feed. It is in their movies and in their television shows. So they really are familiar with a lot of these products. Most of these are disposable pods. The Sworn Air is a refillable system. So you buy the nicotine juice in a bottle and refill it. Number 10, the Views, that one actually is a disposable one. So you would use it until it runs out and you toss the whole thing into the garbage. So let me explain to you about these disposable pod-based vape devices. So the Fix on the top, that's more popular in the Midwest and Western part of the country. So let's concentrate on looking at the Juul. So there are 2 parts. You've got the rechargeable battery, and then you have the flavor pod that comes pre-filled that's on the right. The cover used to indicate the flavor when there was mint and mango and, dozens and dozens of flavors. And all you do is remove that cover, put it into the battery, and there is no on-off switch. You simply put it into your mouth and draw on it. Two undergrads at Stanford University actually developed the Juul, and they wanted to make it simple and easy to use. And one of the reasons these things took off so quickly was, for years, the CDC and other government health agencies struggled to find ways to help people stop smoking. Patches and nicotine gum, they help, but they don't replace the behavior. They just replace the nicotine. So when these devices first came out, a lot of them looked more like a cigarette, just a little bit bigger with the refillable tank. So the thinking was, while people could start at a higher level of nicotine and then buy lower and lower nicotine levels, at the same time, they still had that behavior that they were used to, that holding that cigarette in their hand, putting it into their mouth, right? So when these things came out and when the Juul came out, they rushed to get it to market without really knowing enough about it, with very little regulation. And that's how these things took off so quickly. And that Juul especially became really popular with young people. It's small, it's easy to conceal. If you can see look at my hand, it's about that big, right? And that wide, so it's tiny. You can hide it in your pocket. You can almost hide it in the palm of your hand. And it's easy to use. Just pop it in there and you go. The pods we're selling do sell for about 4 for $16. You could both buy a kit with 4 pods and a device for about $29, $39 right now. So, of course, as I said earlier, those pods are now available only in tobacco and menthol flavors. However, there's a way to get around that, and this is that loophole. You can buy empty Juul pods online, and then you buy the juice separately, and then you can reuse each of those pods 3 or 4 times before you have to toss it in the garbage. So, like I said, there's a way to get around some of these things, unfortunately. So let's take a look at 2 different devices. So the one on your left, that is the Juul, and the one on the right is one of the tank systems. Very popular with people who vape as a hobby. They rebuild their coils, they might mix their own juices, you refill that tank, and that's the ones that make the real big cloud. So it's not discreet, right? You're gonna see someone using that. So one of the biggest differences between the two is the type of nicotine. The refillable tank on the right uses a free-base nicotine, and all the pod systems, including the Juul, use salt-based nicotine. Here's the biggest difference. Salt-based nicotine is a lot smoother than other nicotine. So if you were to try a cigarette for the first time, you're definitely gonna cough. You might actually get sick to your stomach from it. If you try the one on the right with that big cloud that you're gonna get, it might make you cough and choke a little bit. It might be uncomfortable. You might not want to do that again. But the Juul is so easy and simple to use, and it's smoother. Salt-based nicotine is smooth. I am an ex-smoker of about 30 years, but a couple years ago when this all became popular and I knew I was going to be doing the education, I tried that Juul. I could not believe how simple it was and that it didn't hurt my throat. It was basically like sucking in air that had a great flavor. And that's because it's salt-based nicotine. And because that experience is pleasurable, it's going to keep people coming back for more. They're more likely to want to use the device again. Another difference between the 2 devices is the amount of nicotine. There's a lot more nicotine in the pod-based systems, and I'll get into that more as we go. And then the other thing is with the Juul pods, they are meant to not be refilled. They're made that you would just throw them away and put in a new one, and the other has a refillable tank. However, some people will open those pods up and they might be filling them with THC oil. And I'll talk about that more at the end, but we have to be really careful, you know, if you try one of these, if a friend or somebody would offer it to you. So let's look at the nicotine levels. A pack of cigarettes has 20 cigarettes in it. Each cigarette has about 10 puffs. So that's about 200 puffs in a pack and 20 milligrams of nicotine. One jewel pod also has about 200 puffs in a pod, but it has more than 40 milligrams of nicotine. That fixed device that came up on the other slide has about 200 puffs. That's 75 milligrams of nicotine. And then the sworn pod, 200 puffs, but the same amount of nicotine as 4.5 packs of cigarettes. These things are so concentrated with nicotine, it's so concentrated in these devices, and there is only one reason to put that much nicotine in there, and that is to get you hooked. High levels of nicotine don't taste better. There is nothing else that they do other than get your brain hooked on it, that you come back and repeat the behavior. So let's get into more what's in those pods and in those e-juices. So when I started doing this presentation on vaping in general a couple of years ago, you know, even before the pod systems came out, and I would go into a middle school and ask kids, what do you think is in those e-juices? And I would hear water, flavoring, juice. Some kids would mention nicotine. And to be honest, I couldn't tell them much because there wasn't a lot of government regulation. They weren't required to tell people what were in them. So I knew there were chemicals. I knew the nicotine was addictive, but beyond that, I couldn't really tell them. But more recently, they have been forced to tell us what is in them. So here are just some of the chemicals that are in vaping pods and vaping juices. So cigarettes have thousands of chemicals in them. I have heard that they're believed to be 300 to 400 chemicals in vaping things, vaping juices. But these are many of the same chemicals that you would find in a cigarette. So there's things like arsenic, which is found in rat poison, heavy metals like lead, iron, you know, and the ones that are in orange, those are ones that are harmful or potentially harmful substances. So, you know, there is no way that these things are healthier than cigarettes. And I get that question a lot. I would say if you are a 2 or 3 pack a day smoker and you want to use vaping to quit, it's not a bad alternative. But really, the majority of people who vape do not do it to quit smoking. You know, it has been marketed as an alternative. It has been marketed as being very cool. And, you know, anyway, that people that use it to quit, there's some that can do that. But most people who try to use these devices to quit smoking either end up continuing to vape or going back to cigarettes or doing both. So some of those chemicals you just saw, this is other places they are found. So when you are vaping, you are not vaping water with flavoring in it. You are not vaping juice. You are vaping hundreds and hundreds of dangerous chemicals. So here's the thing. You know, we call it vaping. And when you see someone using one of these devices, it looks like steam or water vapor, right? And if I would spray water over a bunch of people in a room, no one would get worried about that. You know, only thing that's in water is hydrogen and oxygen. It's going to evaporate into the air. It's not going to leave behind any residue. Let's say I walked into a classroom though with a can of aerosol hairspray. I wanted to spray that throughout the room. You know, first of all, the chemicals are listed on that can. It could make people sick. But really the biggest difference is it's an aerosol, not a vapor. And aerosols leave little particles behind. So if I sprayed that hairspray, there are going to be particles left in that room. You know, a desktop would feel sticky. You would know that somebody had sprayed something in there. On the other hand, when you inhale it into your lungs, it's going to leave some of those particles behind. You know, let's say if you inhale steam, for some people that helps clear their sinuses or clear their lungs out if they have breathing issues, but it's water and we're not going to worry about it too much. But aerosol will leave particles behind in the lungs. And honestly, we don't know yet how bad that could be for us. Obviously, it's not healthy, but we don't have any research to tell you much more than that. You are putting these chemicals and you are putting this aerosol into your brain. Into your lungs. So why they call it vaping when really they should have called it aerosoling? For marketing purposes. If I said, hey, do you want an aerosol? You're going to think chemicals. If I say, do you want to vape? You're thinking vapor, you're thinking water, and it just sounds safer. So the campaign to target teens. So people who smoke cigarettes, definitely trend older. We have been educating children in this country for years and years about the dangers of smoking. They have gotten that message in school. There are warnings on the cigarette packages. Most parents, most adult smokers, in fact, will go outside to smoke because we know how dangerous second and third hand smoke could be, especially to younger children. So teen smoking rates have actually really plummeted. And, there was not going to be anybody to replace these people that smoke. And then along comes this vaping thing. And we market it to those kids. It was attracted to teenagers. Juul, for sure, really went after the teen market. And their goal was to get them young. So even though the age to purchase tobacco is 18 and now just went to 21, 90% of the people who smoke or vape start before the age of 18. And that loops back to what I started talking about in this presentation was the development of the brain. They want to get you younger. If they get you hooked before your brain is developed, you're more likely to get addicted and more likely to continue with the behavior. And it is extremely, extremely difficult to stop. I know I smoked until about the age of 29, and I know how hard it was to quit. It's really difficult to replace that. And if vaping devices would become difficult for people to get, they're going to go to cigarettes because they're going to be hooked on that nicotine. As a matter of fact, teens who vape are 4 times more likely to smoke cigarettes at some time in their life. So really, even though there are some laws in place now, and Juul especially gotten a boatload of trouble for marketing to young people. Unfortunately, many of them were already hooked by the time a lot of these flavors and that marketing was no longer allowed to be aimed at teens. Also, when we talk about big vape, so we know that these big companies want to get their customers addicted. They introduced these flavors that were definitely more attractive to young people than they were to adults. And they used great marketing strategies, especially social media, to reach that audience. So, Juul Labs, you think of Juul as being a separate entity, but what happened is a couple of years ago, Juul came under a lot of pressure for the advertising to teens and for promoting these flavors. And about a year after that, the CEO of Juul went on a morning talk show and somebody asked him, should people vape? And he actually said, vaping is dangerous. People should not use vaping devices. And of course, he was fired. And they brought in somebody from the big tobacco companies. So now Juul, the company that makes Marlboro cigarettes, invested about $13 billion in Juul. So they have a big stake in this now. And then they brought in their people as a CEO and their people for marketing because they've been fighting, the the stigma and the disdain for smoking for years. So they kind of know how to get around that, how to advertise, how to market these things and still maintain a customer base. So there's a relationship there. And if people stop vaping, cigarette companies are right there with their arms wide open, because they'll still make a lot of money, not more money, by selling cigarettes than they will by selling vape. Here are some of the flavors that have been very popular, definitely marketed to kids. So on the upper left corner, you see those bottles. So those bottles there, we have lemon, banana, and coffee. Those are still available online and in stores, especially smoke shops, vaping stores. That one in the middle, that cherry limeade, that would be a disposable device, still available in gas stations and Wawa, Turkey Hill, and other stores. And there's chicken and waffles on there. I get a lot of oohs when people see that. There you can also get like leather flavor, dirty ashtray. And then there are a lot of people that will purchase the different flavors and mix their own. So let's talk about some of the health effects of vaping. Okay. Kind of a review of what we talked about earlier. Absolutely is going to affect the lungs. You're putting chemicals into your lungs that don't belong there. Because it's a stimulant, it affects your heart rate, your blood pressure. It's going to affect your nasal passages and your throat. It can be an irritant. We talked about how it rewires the brain. So when someone starts using nicotine, it creates that pleasure in the brain, and they want more and more and more. There are actually some studies that are starting to show that teens who vape and use nicotine will kind of rewire their brain. So should they try other drugs later, that people who vape get more pleasure from those drugs than the people who don't vape. Therefore, they are more likely to repeat the behavior of using that drug than the person that didn't vape. So, it could increase risk of heart disease, damaged DNA. As you can see, these would be more long-term effects. But there, it's something to think about. And then popcorn lung. If you've never heard of popcorn lung, it is named that because it's a condition that people who work in microwave popcorn factories sometimes are afflicted with. So people who work in a microwave popcorn factory are also always breathing in chemicals that they use to make the butter flavoring. And one of the chemicals is this diacetyl. And that is also found in vape juices, in the flavorings for vape juices. And what it does, it constricts the airways, it scars them, so it's a lot harder to breathe. So imagine trying to breathe through a coffee stirrer with your nose pinched, and it can lead to other diseases. So we are seeing some of that in people who are using vape products. And I want to mention coronavirus. So, the coronavirus that has tipped our world upside down. Obviously, if you vape or smoke cigarettes, you are taking in chemicals and you run that risk of damaging your lungs. Then if you would come down with COVID-19, you are going to be more vulnerable to the effects and might get sicker because of that damage already done to your lungs than someone who doesn't smoke. So it's definitely something to think about. That I know that young people in general don't seem to be as affected by the coronavirus. But if you're a smoker or you're a vapor, you're definitely running more of a risk of having some long-term consequences from vaping and the coronavirus. So I want to talk a little bit about vaping THC oils or marijuana, because this is a huge trend. So we call it aerosolizing or vaping marijuana. So on the left of the screen, that green thing there and some of the silver, the longer parts of those are batteries. So the person would buy a battery, and then what they can do is they can buy different tips. So number 12 up in the upper left, that would be used with the waxes. So if you look towards the middle of your screen, that yellow blob, it says BHO, those are the waxes. very high in THC, and those are usually used with that number 12 tip. What it does is you put a little bit in there, the battery heats it up to high temperature, vaporizes it, and you inhale it, okay? There are also some tips that can be used with flower type marijuana or herb. That would be at the top in the middle there, what most adults would be familiar with. And then there also are the e-liquids. So marijuana in the 1970s was not very strong. THC is the drug that makes you, is the part of marijuana, the chemical that makes you high. The other main chemical in marijuana is cannabinoid or CBD. So we're focusing on the THC concentration. In the 70s, the THC concentration was about 4%. Over the years, as marijuana use has become more popular, it's become legal for medical and recreational use in some states. It has gotten stronger. So the average leaf or flower marijuana that you would buy out on the street would be 15 to 30% THC. So it's a lot stronger. We're talking about 4 times stronger than it was in the 70s. However, these waxes and these oils are much, much higher in THC. They can be up to 80, 90% pure THC. So the high is different, and absolutely it's going to make a difference in how it affects your brain. And I'll be honest, we don't have studies yet. We are just starting to do those. You cannot use a chemical that alters how you feel on a regular basis and not have some long-term consequences, right? If you look at the picture in the middle on the bottom, you have the battery, and then you see some of the little containers. Those are called cartridges or carts. If you are buying weed on the street, most dealers will carry these carts pre-filled. The substances in there don't look quite like the e-juices. They're usually thicker, stickier, and more yellow in color. It might have a little bit of a smell of marijuana if you hold that thing up to your nose, but it's not skunky, not nearly as strong as the flower marijuana. And also when it's being inhaled, when it's heated and inhaled, it doesn't smell like marijuana. So it's easier for people to get away with it. And then also what some people will do is mix some of the flavored e-liquid with the THC oil. So that's usually what you will smell. It's a different high, much, much stronger. The reports of people passing out, having seizures, losing control because the THC levels are so high. Oh, there's another picture of the wax there on the bottom. Dabbing is using the wax. So if you hear people talk about dabbing, remember the dab dance a few years ago? That was actually talking about dabbing or inhaling the more pure THC substances. One of the things it says there on the screen talks about how oils and dabbing the waxes associated with emergency room visits. Mostly what they're seeing is accidental ingestion by young children, especially in states where it is legal for recreational use. People get a little more they get less vigilant, and kids might get their hands on it. Also, people who aren't as experienced and they're using this really high THC concentration, we're seeing more cases of psychosis. So I don't know that anyone's ever died of a marijuana overdose, but people are overdosing in that they are visiting the emergency room because of the psychosis, which means they lose touch with reality. And it can take some time for that to wear off. And there are actually some people that if they do it enough, they might never come out of that psychosis. Also, what we're seeing is an increase in schizophrenia. So someone who uses this might already be predisposed to schizophrenia, and the drug use is what triggers it, or they may not have been. So it's definitely something to explore if you or someone you know is interested or using these substances, that there can be some pretty dire consequences. So it's almost a year ago now, we started hearing about people having issues with their lungs from vaping. Okay? And we weren't really sure what it was, but in the end, it seems to be more related to using the THC oils rather than the nicotine vapes. I can't rule that out completely, but definitely there is, it leans more towards the THC oils. And just to quickly explain what happens is, to make those oils that are so high in THC, it goes through a process that it requires volatile chemicals, vitamin E acetate, it might be using butane oil, and this process extracts that very pure THC. Now, if you're buying that in states where it's legal for recreational use, there might not be a lot of regulation, but you would usually go buy it in a store and you can probably trust it a little bit. But living in a state like Pennsylvania, it's very likely that the people who are manufacturing that THC oil are two idiots in their basement, playing with chemicals that they really don't know much about. And when they extract the THC oil, they are leaving behind some of those toxins. And it seems to be that which was what was making people so sick. And I did meet a young man, 17 years old, a high school junior, local, who had started vaping marijuana and had been doing it for about 4 months when he got really sick, flu-like symptoms, high fever. And his mom took him to the emergency room and they did a lung x-ray and it was clear. And they said, he's got the flu, take him home, you know, chicken soup, lots of rest. 4 days later, she said the fever was still extremely high. He was having trouble breathing. He was losing weight rapidly and she took him back. They did another chest x-ray and his lungs were completely clouded. And he was diagnosed with this vaping illness. They told them if they'd waited 8 more hours, he would have been dead. So he spent a few weeks in the hospital and is definitely doing better. But when I met him a couple of months ago, he was still recovering. He was still trying to put the weight back on. He no longer can play the sports that he loved because of the damage to his lungs. He only has 64% lung capacity. So he can't run, let alone climb upstairs is difficult for him right now. And the doctors have no idea whether he will make a full recovery, get worse, or stay the same. So, it can really have some long-term consequences when you put these chemicals into your body. So we are at the end of our presentation. If you have any kind of questions, please feel free to email me. The address is up there on the screen and I will get back to you. And if you're interested in learning about some of our other programs, we do our current drug trends where we talk about tobacco, vaping, marijuana, alcohol, cocaine, heroin, other drugs. We also have our HOPE, Heroin Opioid Prevention Education, where we focus on heroin and opioids, and many others. So if you're interested, visit our website to learn more about this. Thank you. Have a good day.